All right, we're on episode 50, a special episode here. And today I'm going to do something a little bit differently. We're going to go a bit longer, and I'm going to talk about my journey as to how I stepped into a $0 base salary role to ultimately selling about $3 to $4 million of accounting services per year. So if you're interested in that story, stay tuned and let's dive in. And welcome to another episode of CAS Minute. Today, we've got a special. And that special is just talking about my journey. It's one of the things that comes naturally to me. It's a part of my foray from accounting into sales, into firm ownership. And so I want to go back in time to how did this all happen? How did it all come together? So I spent about 8 years in financial audit, mid-market, top 10 firms, and just grinding it out, working as an audit staff, an audit senior, an audit manager, and the experience was kind of what you think it would be. And so once I reached the conclusion of my work in public and knew it was time to move on, I applied to work as an accounting advisory manager in an advisory firm based out of Dallas, Texas. They were opening up their Denver office, and so it was really, really nascent in this market. And I had an opportunity to interview, and we met in person. The first question was, have you ever thought about business development? And my initial reaction was like, what is that? Business development? Oh, a sales role, sales role. Have I ever thought about a sales role? And the answer was clearly no. I was an accountant. I don't do sales. That's not my skill set. There's too much risk. I don't think I could actually do that role. And so throughout the course of the interview process, these seeds were planted. Hey, we think this might be a good opportunity for you. Hey, we think this may be something you would excel in. Why don't you just give it a shot? What I didn't know at that point in time is that this sales role actually came with a lucrative $0 base salary. And you might be asking yourself like, all right, that's too risky. There's no chance somebody's going to move into that. Well, the way that it was initially structured was that I had a $0 base salary and my pay was predominantly based on activity and commission-based pay, meaning the number of meetings that I scheduled, the number of qualified leads, the number of closed deals that I generated, I would get paid for. And then ultimately, for closed deals with incoming revenue, I would receive a commission on that. So it was pretty clear to me that based on the inputs of my hard work, I would receive a direct output. All right, I know what the mission is. I know what activity I need to generate, and I need to trust the process in order to ultimately see some kind of dollars flowing into my pocket, which would be an ideal scenario for anybody that has to pay their bills. Knowing that I came from an accounting background and had zero skill set in sales, my first step was actually to hire an executive sales coach. I didn't exactly know how to do this. I didn't know who to go to. I didn't know what I was looking for really, besides the fact that I knew I needed to educate myself on the strategy of sales, on sales fundamentals. And so I was fortunate enough to reach out to a few connections who knew somebody in the local area named Dirk. And Dirk, he just took me under his wing. And I met with Dirk on a weekly basis at first and then a monthly basis thereafter for about 2 years. And what was foundational about that was that he took my mind out of an accounting mindset, out of the technical details, and oriented it more around solving problems and communicating expertise. It was all revolving around what my experience to that date had been. So how do we leverage this accounting skill set, your relational capabilities, your acumen as it relates to understanding business, and translate that to sales strategy? And that was a 2-year-long process. This wasn't something that happened overnight. And it was foundational in the sense that we learned sales strategies. We learned spin selling. We learned solutions-based selling. We learned storyboarding. We learned about all of these different tactics and applied them to the B2B services sector that I was selling in. Now, again, these concepts, while seemingly simple to me now, at that point in time, I was like, whoa, this just feels like manipulation. And it's not. It really is. How do you architect a conversation? How do you architect a narrative through the lens of supporting the individual you're having a conversation with? How do you create a story to help this individual solve a pain that they're experiencing? And how do you help them not only reach a goal, but exceed it and move forward and cast a vision of what that looks like on the back end of potentially working together? And or if you're not a good fit, how do you find the right resource for them to be successful in their role? I think that's one of the most critical parts I learned early on was that in my power in that seat as a salesperson with a variety of services to provide, I wasn't always the best resource. And I knew that. And so the biggest part of those conversations revolved around how can I be the biggest asset to them in the seat that I have, whether or not me or my team are capable of solving their problem. And that right there led to a high degree of relationship building. And over the period of time that I was working in that role and then a subsequent sales role, I learned the power of relationships, the power of following up, the power of making introductions, the power of staying connected in ways that I'd never learned in accounting. And this is a real world that now can be accomplished very well in a virtual format, whereas back in 2017, that wasn't necessarily on the radar. So over the course of the 10 or so months that I started with this company, I started experiencing what sales was like, started working with a sales coach. I started to see some degree of success. I started to see some deals fall into place. Over the course of about 10 months, we sold about 1.3 or so million dollars in total revenue. We brought on a team of about 10, and it was something to be proud of. Things were going well, and I was excited. The challenge in that was that there wasn't real good definition around how do sales folks interact well in this seat at this company. And so my compensation changed around about 4 times. It wasn't one of those environments that I could really hang my hat on and say, I feel great about this long term. But I was super proud about the work that we did, the clients that we helped, the teams that were brought on board. It was really, really special. And I learned so much. And the other thing too is I was just grateful for the opportunity. Had they not inspired the confidence within me and seen this skill set, this unidentified skill set in me that I didn't see in myself, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so while taking that leap of faith and taking a $0 base salary and hiring a sales coach was completely outside of the purview of where I thought my career would go, it completely set me off on a different trajectory. So subsequent to my time at that first firm in that sales role, I started to continue beating down the sales door and thinking, well, I want to keep doing this because this is fun and I like it. I'm enjoying casting a wide net and meeting new people and going to networking events and creating conversations where there was little awareness before we walked into a room together. It was fun. And I wasn't doing accounting work every day, which I learned over time that I I did not naturally lean towards. I didn't naturally gravitate towards the way in which I was previously solving problems, whereas now it was more creative outlet of more of my natural gifts and tendencies. And so I'm a firm believer of whether you're in a sales role or not, how do you lean into those gifts that you're equipped with to help serve other people really well? And you can do that even if you're not in a sales specific role. You can leverage your sales or your skill set really well to enable you to be a good salesperson by learning some of those foundational techniques that I was fortunate to learn through working with an executive sales coach. So after casting that really wide net from a networking perspective and from a community perspective, after this first role, I was able to start to create a lot of opportunity for myself in taking a next step. I was then fortunate enough to step into about a 50-person CAS practice focusing on fractional CFO work that had not previously had any type of sales leadership, sales activity, or sales emphasis, process, systems in the last 10 years. And so I was given an opportunity to lead the sales organization for this company. And it was such a cool experience as a first foray into CAS, into advisory services, into outsourced accounting back in 2018. And There's no playbook. I wasn't connected to the CAS space. I wasn't connected to accounting conferences or other folks that have been doing this for longer than I had. I wasn't even aware that podcasts or resources existed for people in that seat. And so this is still looking at it through the lens of connecting with a network of a target market versus working alongside of those that are building in the same direction that I was building. So in some ways, I was this ship sailing through the night, just trying to architect something that I thought would help people and make sense for internal operations and efficiency, and ultimately close deals and lead to revenue for the company I was working at. And it was a ride. So I joined this company actually in 2019, and this was several months before the pandemic hit. When COVID hit, I didn't really know what to do. I didn't know how to sell because for the previous year, all I'd been doing is going to in-person networking events and shaking hands and kissing babies and slinging deals in person. And it was not something that I was accustomed to. While at the same time, our entire team of accounting professionals and CFOs already delivered services remotely. So that was a benefit from a services perspective. However, sales just didn't happen like that when COVID hit for me. So it was a drastic shift into, okay, how do we create a better virtual or digital experience for prospects and then start to cast a wide net online? And that's when I started to look at how do we create digital assets? How do we create content? How do we create connections with companies through this era where we can't physically meet together? And the beauty in that is that there was so much creativity that popped up during that time. I started doing some fun work on YouTube. I started creating different videos for people on LinkedIn. And that was kind of the first step into that arena, although I didn't really take hold of it until several years later. But it was just a first foray into like, does this even work? What do people gravitate towards? And are people comfortable with hiring an accountant remotely? The company at that point in time had already demonstrated quite a bit of success in that arena, but we're looking to scale. We're looking to grow. And post-COVID, the employment, the recruitment, retention, the sales, what just got flipped on its head. And so while we saw this astronomical growth in the outsourced or virtual CFO realm, we also saw a lot of volatility in the employee segment. Employees were leaving, compensation was going up, the world is becoming more flat, as Milton Friedman has alluded to. Yeah. It was one of those things where like an employee could now work for anybody, anywhere. And so they were jumping ship to go to different opportunities. So all the while, we're seeing massive amounts of growth within the firm. We're starting to see sales having to take on $3 to $5 million of additional net new revenue per year on an annualized basis in order to grow at a 10, 20% clip. And so when we think about that amount of volume for a, $5,000 plus dollar a month contract isn't terrible. So you think about closing about 20 to 30 deals a year. My goal was 2 deals per month closed at an average contract value between 75 and 100,000 in that first 2 years. And as that average contract value, as that average monthly value crept up, that target also got incrementally bigger. When you're facing increased sales goals as well as increased employee turnover, that employee turnover leads to client turnover, which means to having to backfill additional revenue lost with net new revenue. So as you're adding on this new revenue, you're also backfilling what was lost, meaning that the net new difference was kind of challenging to achieve given I didn't have any control over churn based on client experience, based on increased optionality for them, things like that. So really to shift a focus from how do we create all this net new revenue to how do we service this really well operationally? How do we create really good consistency and experience for a team? And ultimately, the ways in which that was being accomplished was just challenging. And I didn't understand how can I, in my role, create the change that needs to happen while also lean into this industry and figure out what best practices, figure out where the industry is going. And so after creating this, what I think was really, really quality sales process, sales system, sales messaging, assets for the company, after creating all of that, it was kind of ready for my next step, my next foray, as there was a directional shift, a directional strategy that didn't quite align with where I thought the industry was going. As at that point in time, I was really starting to step into educational resources on CAS, on accounting firms, on technology, on operations. And I started listening to Accounting High. My now friend, Scotty Scarano, has been running this podcast for many years. And I started to listen to that towards the end of my tenure at this last firm. And it changed my perspective. It changed how I thought about where the industry was going, particularly listening to great, great interviews with folks like Jody Grundon or Marie Green or Jason Statz or Logan Graff. All of these folks years ago started to talk about how the industry was changing, and it started to influence my perspective on how I think the next generation of firms will look. And unfortunately, I wasn't in a position where I could have or exert that type of influence over the decision making. And so there became this kind of natural shift in directional thinking, strategic thinking for long-term growth, operations, and scalability. And that's when, at that point in time, it made more sense for me to depart and start to look at other opportunities that existed. And there was zero intent to start my own practice. None. And it wasn't until I actually connected with Scott Scarano and several other accounting firm leaders in the spring of 2022 where the encouragement to start my own thing just became too overpowering to ignore. And that's when on June 3rd of 2022, I thought, man, maybe this is my time. Maybe I can try this. Maybe there's room for something I could create. And it's not that I had this overwhelming belief in myself to create a firm that would be operationally minded, that would sell effectively and deliver great services to clients, and also create a phenomenal environment for employees. But there was just a thought that if I don't do this, I may regret it. And that was the impetus. From June 3rd, 2022 onward, I started to work. And for over 2 months, I did not go to market at all. I did not tell anybody what I was doing. I simply worked on the foundational infrastructure of operations, of branding, of being prepared to take on a client that I could service really well. And I wanted to make sure that from day one, that experience was locked in. Now, our processes, our systems, our communications, our operations have changed drastically since that time. But at the very least, no matter how little a first client was going to pay, I wanted to make sure that their experience was high quality. Now, what I've learned since then is that the teammates that we've brought on to Full Send are capable of servicing clients far more effectively than I am. But I wanted to make sure that they had a good experience with me, who is their primary service provider from day one. Now, that was a really scary jump going from working 4 years in sales to going back to client service because my mindset was so geared around relationships and helping to solve problems that when I shifted over to service delivery, it was kind of tough. But at the same time, I knew if I didn't know how to do something, I would figure out how to do it. I would find a way to solve the problem, whether that was through a skill set that I could acquire and learn, or through a partner, a resource, or technology that I could bring on board in order to help solve a client's problem. Having that agility, having that mindset really helped early on to understand, hey, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm going to tell a client I'm going to get it done, and then I will figure it out on the back end. I wouldn't recommend that strategy as you're scaling beyond a certain number of employees because that leads to a lot of whiplash. But early on, if you're a solo practitioner, you need that type of mindset to be able to sell, execute, and deliver something that solves a problem. If you can operate with that mindset really scrappily early on, it will really help you to systematize your approach as you move forward. So it's one of those things where I have learned so much about sales. I've learned so much about how to serve clients through sitting in roles of initial sales rep, sales closer, client success, operational service provider. There are so many things you learn throughout this journey, but I can tell you one thing. I learned so much from hiring an expert, hiring a professional to coach me on the things that I didn't know. That enabled me to move from selling nothing a year, getting a $0 base salary, to ultimately selling over $3 million a year in CAS services. There are so many strategies and formulas that I've created for myself since then. There's a lot of conversations that we've had on this podcast relative to what some of those things are. Ultimately, you need to lean into your strengths. You need to lean into the things that you love doing in order to create an effective sales playbook for yourself. I believe holistically that if you are an accountant that has a quality sales profile, sales skill set, going to be equipping yourself for a tremendous amount of opportunity moving forward. That being said, I don't think you need to have a distinct accounting skill set in order to be effective in sales in a CAS role, but the more that you can speak at a high level around the accounting nuances and how they impact clients and how they solve their problems, I think the better equipped you'll be to sell that work. You just need to lean into your flavor, your methodology, your style on how to do that really well. I hope a little bit about my journey has been encouraging to you today. I hope it's kind of enlightening to know that you can go from being an accounting manager, you can go from being an auditor to just limitless opportunity if you put some time into it, if you put some discipline into taking these uncomfortable steps forward in your career and believing in yourself. You don't want to be in a scenario where you look back on your career and say, man, I wish I would have tried that. Life is too short. Take that step. Step outside of the comfort zone and be bold. Be bold in your approach. I'm always happy to answer questions for anybody going through these thoughts, potentially new experiences in their career. I love having this conversation about how the things that I've experienced could potentially help somebody in their career. So reach out to me. There is a text link in the description of the podcast, so feel free to text that and I'll get back to you. But I hope this was fun. I hope this is helpful. And we're going to do more special episodes, about 10 episodes or so, maybe bring some guests on board and have some fun here as we continue to try to educate the market on CAS sales, CAS marketing, operations, culture, and everything revolving around the future of accounting. Till next time.